Welcome to Marketing People Love. Today I have Nick from Midday Squares. He's a crazy unique guest because he has been sharing his story out loud since day one of their journey to become a $100 million chocolate brand. He's going to share everything from what sharing his story has done for their business, the connections and ways that it's helped them grow, but also all of the little insecurities and thoughts that he had to overcome in order to put himself out there and what he's learned along the way. I guarantee you that this will inspire you to think about not just business or marketing differently, but probably your entire life. He shares how his dad dying when he was 10 years old in a car crash changed the perspective he had on his approach to his life, but also business and ultimately content, putting himself out there. It is that deep. It is that meaningful. I'm telling you right now, you'll want to stick around to the very, very end. Nick, thank you so much for joining us on Marketing People Love. Welcome to the podcast, Nick. And it's not only an honor to have you, but I know we've talked a little bit about how you never even intended to be out there in the universe. You know, you self-describe as an introvert, as someone who may not say that they like interacting with people all the time, and yet here you are on a podcast. Tell us a little bit about yourself and this journey you've been on when it just comes to putting yourself out there through all of these different mediums and what's happening.
I am the furthest person. I am a very introverted person, but there's this conflicting side of me that I'm an ex-athlete who is ridiculously competitive. And I played hockey, I was a goalie, and that competitiveness is that I'm willing to do anything that I believe is required to be successful. And therefore, I truthfully, with my whole heart, believe that in this day and age, to build a brand against all odds, which we can get into why it's all odds are stacked against you, that when I was speaking with my brother-in-law, who's our third partner, and he's really the one who pushed this build out loud and getting both me and my wife comfortable with being in front of a camera, why I was so apprehensive to do it. But the competitiveness in me knew that we don't stand a chance at success unless we do this. So that competitiveness allowed me to override anything that I didn't want to do for this part of building out loud and go all in on it. Was like, okay, if we're going to do this, because I see it. I saw my brother-in-law. He spent a year and a half prior to Midday Squares building this clothing company called Chase and Hunter, which was really in Canada amongst college campuses. And he somehow, through Snapchat was really big at the time, still is, but it was like the hot item at that time, was built this network of people. Like he got flown out to the Texans to like pump them up before a pregame, was hanging on the set of Game of Thrones with Sophie, like just really somehow interjected himself into this world of which we like to say we have no business being in terms of, you know, these Canadians out in Montreal. And I saw that happening for literally a year. And him and I, we both always talked about this journey because, you know, he riffed with me on operations. I'm really an ops nerd at the heart of it, solving problems and doing that type of stuff. And I always riffed with him on what the hell is going on over here and how are you doing this? And we kind of naturally came together in that it was really wild to see what he had pulled off with essentially nothing. There was no real business. There was no real anything other than sheer energy on a camera that brought people to a table that want to be part of a thing. And there was, at the time, they didn't even really have a thing to be part of.
So much to unpack there. Two things I think I want to drill into next, because I think these are natural things that everyone feels. One is, let's start here, competitor. Most of the time when people are competitive, and I guess I've never seen myself as I am very competitive. I love winning. It's like my umame, if you will.
Why wouldn't you?
It's my sixth sense.
It's fun.
Oh God, I love winning. But I'm also not the kind of person that like needs to see other people lose in order to enjoy myself. And there are people out there that are like that. They're like, look, I find more joy in seeing the people that I want to see lose than I do in me winning. Like, I get it. But
I'm so not like
when
that.
I look at the idea, all good. I appreciate that too. I think when you think about it though, it's like, well, if I build out loud, meaning in public, you guys are do such a great job of telling your story on a mix of whether it's TikTok and Reels and YouTube. Also, you have your own podcast. It's the top of your website. It's the first thing there. Most people are like, what if we're giving away our secrets? Right? I think most people don't build out loud for two reasons. One is they're afraid of giving away things that they feel like are their secrets or their playbook or whatever. And then I think the other reason is just a sense of they don't want to be embarrassed for some reason. Like, what if we say we're going to do something and we fail? Or what if we do this and it doesn't work out? Or, and so I'd love your reaction to those two areas, because it sounds like you were more in the camp when you're saying competitive of like, even though I knew I didn't want to do this, I knew we'd stand a better chance if I was out there, and you saw that. So how does that feel in terms of, have you ever worried or thought about the idea of like giving away your playbook, or has that just been like, look, that's just a minor thing compared to the upside of what that could bring in terms of connections and conversations?
I really want to nail, because I feel so much about everything you just said. So I think we need to start in my dad died tragically while he was driving me while I was 10. And this story, I'm saying it not for people to feel sympathy for me, but you can't understand me, therefore you can't understand a journey unless we start there. So that experience taught me the fragility, because it happened while we were driving. Everything was cool and then everything was not within a split second. And he was very entrepreneurial. It taught me two really major things that are the super catalyst to going back to your point of why I am not a person that believes in competition in a zero-sum game. And that will lead into why I'm not worried about a lot of things. So I'm going to bring it all together. So that experience is, for me, the moment in my life. It took years after it happened. It wasn't a moment, but we're going to do it quickly, of where I realized I'm not optimizing for future time, because my dad optimized for future time. Therefore, what I mean by that is we're going to do X, Y, and Z today in the hopes of X, Y, and Z happening tomorrow sometime in the future. And we didn't get that at all. There was lots of plans. He worked a lot. There was a lot of, this is what life's going to look like at some point in time in the future. So I stopped living my life that way. And then two, he was, what I'm about to say is not to demean him, because I loved him so much. He just was he was demanding in terms of excellence, and what he perceived of, when I'd go to hockey practice or something of that, if I was slacking or not slacking. And that created a certain level of anxieties that actually caused me to not perform. So what was really interesting is after my dad passed away, I started to accelerate and start to become like, I started at the lowest level in hockey and worked my way up to the top. I wasn't just consistently skilled my whole life. And so why that part of the story is really important is my competitive spirit is based on work ethic, and that you got to be all in. It's not based on zero-sum games. I really don't even think about zero-sum games, because I live in an abundance mentality. Before I even knew what that term really meant, I don't really give a shit, other than I honestly think everybody at some point can just win. I think the bar is so low, and I say this, it may piss people off that are listening to it, of how little amount of humans actually give a shit to even attempt to be great, that all the people that think they're competing against each other are competing against like 5,000 people in the world of 8 billion. Like, you think it's competitive, and it is to a certain extent, but like the bar is really low of how many people are really giving it their all in life past the age of 30. Everything kind of falls apart for people after 30 for some reason. Another piece is I've been taking entrepreneurship. It's been in my blood and doing it very seriously since 19 years old, and I'm 36 now. And so you just learn a bit of shit along the way. And so early on, all of the symptoms that you said, when we're talking about that subject matter of building out loud or not, I've made all of those mistakes in my life, of the sense of where you think any of that is relevant. And what you realize very quickly when hanging around other successful entrepreneurs, or even just listening to them or reading their books, I think a lot of people confuse that you need to be friends with these people to get value out of them. You don't. Is that nobody really did anything intuitively great that wasn't already out in the world. So Google was not the first search engine, Facebook not the first social platform, So to think that you have any like real inherent secret sauce outside of your actual secret sauce is just, I think, fear driven more so than anything. As an entrepreneur, you're just feeling scared. And then back to your point, number two is none of us want to feel judged on the public stage. You know, like failure is really embarrassing, but I've worked through a lot of that because in order to be free, I believe that I can't live trying to please others or for others. Therefore, I put the value of people's opinion on me very low. And therefore, why should I be scared about failing publicly? What does it really mean? It's kind of irrelevant. And so I think you need to go through that journey. And that's why my big thing with any entrepreneur is there's no right or wrong. The only thing that's wrong is not starting early, because you need to get through all these repetitions to finally build a core base of where I think you can handle what's required to be in the arena of entrepreneurship. And some people will knock it out of the park on their first shot, and they'll never have to confront the insecurities. That's why you need a lot of successful people with insecurities. Because if you're not forced to get through the insecurity curve, you kind of just keep the insecurities and the success. Unfortunately, that has not been my ride to the game. I've not succeeded on the first go.
Nick, I gotta say that point resonated with me so much because there isn't anything, there's no silver bullet, nothing's easy, and the humility that comes from truly being, I mean, you kind of said it, I also think of it like a game, because you almost have to, right? Like, it's not life or death, but there are rules to it. There are both spoken and unspoken. There, the field changes where you show up as a person, as an owner, as a brand. It's constantly evolving, and yet there's certain fundamental truths. And so there was so much in that you know I want to respond to it. But I think one of the things was just this idea of, like, I think if I'm sharing back, I feel like when I started putting out content, I remember the conversation because someone called. I remember exactly where I was. They called me out on it. It was like the fiance of one of my friends. It wasn't another business person or anything else. But I remember thinking I had two fears. I had the fear of failure, but I also had the fear of, hey, if I start talking about myself and I start talking about even our success, is that just going to invite people who want to see us fail, right? I just really felt like, who am I to share my thoughts? I haven't built a $1 billion company. I haven't done something, like, who am I to be out there sharing what I'm doing, sharing my thoughts? And it was back when I was going to publish a book, my very first book. I remember thinking, like, I don't like this feeling because people are going to criticize what I might write. They might not like it. They might, this woman looked at me and said, why do you care about the opinions of people you'll never meet or never care to meet? Like, the people who will love it, and that will be positive, and, like, you just need to be yourself and do your thing. And I was like, wow, I hadn't really even thought about that, because I think most of us, and I'm just going to put myself in this bucket, we worry that putting yourself out there, being out there, can come across either as oversharing and come across as egotistical,
narcissistic.
And trust me, like, to some extent, sure, because it was like people that are hardwired that way do present that way, and I'm like, maybe I am, I don't know. I'm like, I don't think that's my intention, but here I am. But I just recognize that by putting myself out there, you're inviting scrutiny, and I think that is an interesting thing to consider. You were willing and able to overcome that. I think a lot of times when people think about sharing out loud, they're worried about, like, would someone steal a company secret? But I think what I love what you were saying is it goes deeper than that. It's like, am I okay putting myself out there, and potentially whatever good or bad comes from that. And I think one of my unexpected journeys in this has been the people that I've had the opportunity to connect with and meet. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about what that looks like. You started with your brother-in-law and, like, how that inspired you to put yourself there, but, like, how has putting your story out there and connecting with people on, whether it's Twitter or X or whatever we want to call it now, or other channels, your podcast, what type of connections and opportunities, and how has it shaped the journey of Midday Squares by having said yes to something that made you potentially uncomfortable?
Yeah. Oh man. So one, everything you said, I've been through and gone through and analyzed, been through. And it's the real journey that a human needs to go on to convince themselves that they are worthy of whatever they want. There's just a lot of psychological barriers to get through. And I'm going to say one thing and then we're going to move on from the subject matter to go on to what you asked. Because my goal is when we do these things, right? If one person walks away from listening to this and their life is like dramatically changed, that's what I care about. This is a really, really powerful story. It took 26 years for my dad's life to become irrelevant. Okay. So what do I mean by that? After he passed away, first 5 years, everybody's trying to keep the name alive. Friends are still in town, blah, blah, blah. By literally year 26, outside of me even thinking about him seldomly per year, it's as if he never existed. And that's how irrelevant you are. That's how irrelevant I am. It don't matter how good or bad you do. It takes only 26 years, I saw with my own eyes, for you to largely become irrelevant. And now let's say you are even a Steve Jobs of the world. I would argue it would take 500 years for you to be written out of the history books. Case in point, I always use this example. Like off the cusp of your head, name me the most influential person in the world in 1432. You won't even be able to come up with one name. And there
Mozart.
was...
No, I'm just kidding. What if I actually had an answer to that?
If you nailed it,
I don't know. I was picking a name that I knew you wouldn't know, and I was like, damn, that would have been such a flex.
That would have been no. It just like there was Michael Jordan, man. There was Steve Jobs. They're gone. They're out of the history books. No one cares.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I tell that story because I hope it allows anybody to get over those fears of whatever it is that they think. And the truth is none of it matters. And you could use that and say, Nick, you're being so bleak. And so there's a specific word. And my answer back to that is you can use that and say, yeah, you could go around life being, oh, well, if everything's irrelevant, why even wake up in the morning? That's on you. I go around life saying everything's irrelevant. And so therefore I'm going to fucking rock this while I'm alive to the best I could. That's it.
Yeah.
And that piece is just super important. So going back to like, what are the benefits of building out loud? So all I know is we had no followings. None of us. We came in at the time, it was like 2000, end of 2017, early 2018. We each maybe had 800, each person had 800 people following them on Instagram. That's how like there was no community. And we just started, at the time, stories was really hot and TikTok didn't even exist. So just stories was like the thing of social. And we just started posting about us building a chocolate company. And there was nothing to it other than people were fascinated by 3 people attempting in this day and age to even build the chocolate bar company, because that in itself was insanity to a lot of humans, and still is. And it is insanity to certain points. But we saw that people really were interested in it. And this is where the early signs of, wow, this is really amazing, is that within, I don't know, like 3 weeks of launching, the community we were building was getting us the retailers. They were literally going out and like, hey, my cousin was the buyer at Whole Foods. I want to help. And this really tiny community was landing us in stores. And so you're like, wow, that's really interesting. Like, we don't know any of these people. And this tribe is starting to form of people that believe in our mission and want to see us succeed. And we just rode that momentum so deeply. And let's fast forward to today, of where I'm going to just list off everything and then we can get into some of the really cool aspects of doing this. Is almost every single store that we've gotten into has come from our social media, vis-a-vis friends that are friends with people that are buyers, husbands that were married to a buyer, the buyer themselves.
Does that include, very curious if that includes both, I saw like the craziest Erewhon display online, and then I also ran into your product in a Starbucks in Canada. Does that include those
yes,
those two?
It includes everything. It includes Target, Whole Foods, Sprouts, you name it. It was all through that. I can literally name you the person who was responsible for the Instagram Connect that ended up turning into these opportunities. And so you see that and you're like, okay, well, it seems a lot easier to focus on content than cold calling retailers, right? That because we have all been through entrepreneurship. Dude, I've been on the other side of entrepreneurship where I didn't have that. It was cold calling. And it's like, I never want to do that again. Like I want it to be soft serve, not cold serve.
Yeah, that's kind of the difference between marketing and sales in like a traditional organization. It's like one's push, one's pull. Like you always want to get someone that's inbound, that's already bought in, is trying to help figure out how to get you in versus like, hey, knock, 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 it's me. We have chocolate. You want us? And they're like, who are you?
Well, in case in point, we haven't had a real formal sales team this whole way through. I don't really believe in formal sales organizations, I would have to say, outside of operational sales, which is very different than bringing in the bacon sales type thing when it comes to business to consumer. I follow along the line of your job is to build a great product and a community, if you can, that cares tremendously about the thing that you're building, that they'll spread it for you, in a certain sense, which levels the bar for that you have to put out true innovation. And we could talk about how, like, I don't think the Midday Square story is as exciting to the end consumer if there wasn't a massive chance that we fail. Like it was that since the beginning, because we had to build a manufacturing plant. And it still is. We talk about this all the time, that there's really no reason why we should still be around. But that really hard barrier is what creates the community to be so excited about making sure we don't die. Because
so tell the audience about that, including myself, to be honest. I mean, I recognize that you are selling hand-to-hand combat, because here's my perception of the product. It took me a while to, I think it was probably 6 months before you and I connected that I tried it for the first time. And of course, again, I only tried it because I'd seen it everywhere. But I hadn't seen ads. I had seen you talking about it. I'd seen you on Twitter. I'd seen you guys doing you guys do a great job with your organic content on TikTok. Again, I hadn't seen an ad. I had just seen content, run across it out in retail in the wild and grab it. And I remember eating it and being like, oh, this is interesting. It's not chocolate. I got the peanut butter one first. So I was like, It's not chocolate. It's not a protein bar. It's something in between. And I remember thinking, like, it tastes great. I wonder how they came up with this idea, because it isn't obvious what it is. No. And because it has to be refrigerated, it's like, it can't sit in the protein bar section. It doesn't sit in the chocolate section. I'm like, man, from the beginning, this thing should not be successful, to your point.
Should not.
And it is. And it does taste that great, right? So let's just start there. If it didn't taste as great, it wouldn't work.
No.
What has been that journey?
Oh, man. Okay. So two things that I want to say before we hit to this piece is, off top of the head, Rochambeau, all of our investors have come from Building Out Loud. So very important to know. And I have the best relationship with our board and our investors, and most people don't have that experience. And let me tell you, it hasn't been sweet all the way through. It's not like it was a vertical rocket ship and everything was good. So of course, everybody's happy. Building Out Loud allowed people to self-select into the Midday Squares vibe. Therefore, you had a checkbox as an investor that you didn't want to get into bed with us because you were repelled by us. You hated what we stood for. You didn't believe in us because we were out there. And that happened a lot. And so it self-selected this group of people that probably could have been predatory had they entered a board level with us, and caused misalignment that you hear a lot with founders that take in outside capital. So just that also, Building Out Loud allows people to self-select out, to your point, Jacques. If they fucking hate you, they're not going to come into your world anyway now. But if they respect and love they're going to come in. And so it allows the right people in. And then finally, I mean, I have ended up in worlds of which I would have never ended up, when everything from, sports teams to presidents to princes from countries that somehow came across it and then looked at the social, or, this actor's daughter reached out to her dad saying, you got to meet these people. Or ended up on stages with people that were my heroes because I interact on Twitter about this story and they buy. Like, I
need a cooler product. I need a cooler product so that I can meet princesses and princes and movie stars.
And like, it's really crazy, the journey. It's been that crazy. And that's just kind of, so moving away from the building out loud, it has the most incredible upside, but it also does have some downside, which I know in the little, I'm not saying this egotistically at all. I'm saying this, it was a good dose. I know why I would never want to be a famous person, because I've had just a little taste of certain aspects. And there's
tell us about that. Tell us about that. Time out. Yeah. Before you tell us about how hard this is, tell us about how you had a dose of fame, because I got to know about this.
Yeah, there's the people you're following, especially coming from my hometown or stuff like that. You'll go out, and I've been many times sitting next to fans at dinner that will stop in the middle of dinner and interject themselves into the dinner. And it's flattering, and you would do anything because these people put you in, or on the street, or you're having a bad day and you don't want to talk. And you're at the airport, they want to do it. And because the micro community is big, but we find the bigger it's gotten in the US and Canada, the more you get stopped. Period. Full stop at wherever you are doing things. And then when you go to events that you're invited by, it amplifies it, because you're now in your micro
smaller
community
pool
there.
of people. Yeah.
Smaller pool. And
of course, you're not using their SaaS product, and so they got to be.
And there's an expectation of you. There's an expectation of you.
Yeah.
And there's this thing is where I've been in conversations where they say, I feel like I know you. That is it's a perverted thing, because you're like, what do you know about me?
It's a parasocial. Yeah, it's parasocial. It's like, and that's how I feel. I listen to a couple podcasters, or I guess podcasts, but there's some guy, Derek Thompson. I love his content. I feel creepy because I love his stuff so much that I'm like, if I ever met him, I do feel like I'd act weird in front of him, even though he has no idea who the hell I am. I'm like, well, I've spent 100 hours with this guy's content, his voice and his perspectives, and he's been part of my life. And you see that, I think, to your point, with celebrities, where people have this one directional relationship where they know more about that celebrity or that person, the way they think, than even some of their best friends, because they're consuming that content. So that's kind of wild. I get
they'll interject themselves into your life at times that you're not ready to receive. Now, that being said, like I said, it was very, very small scale. I do not want to inflate my ego. I'm not saying that I am a celebrity. What I'm trying to say is that there is a downside to building out loud. That's all I'm trying to say.
Sure.
There's a little downside to it, but I believe the upside outweighs the downside. That's what I believe, and that's part of what you have to be willing to trade off. And it's more hard for an introvert on that note. So that's that. I hope I got out how important building out loud is. Yeah,
you did. So you've been building out loud, and we didn't start the podcast with this, but the reality is what you guys are trying to do is incredibly difficult. Logistically, it's I think when people look at the business, it's like, it's not just about, people go, oh, if you have a good product, everything will work out. And I was like, no, like, you're an incredibly like, your product, as far as I'm aware, it is a different category. It's not chocolate, it's not a protein bar. It's got to be in the section where it's refrigerated versus next to like what would have been at the time maybe Cliff bars and protein bars, or in the chocolate section. I'm like, it truly is something that from the outside looking in, you would say this would be such an uphill battle. It's like, we're trying, and yet here you are. I know you guys share some of your general figures, and you can give lifetime sales or whatever, but you guys have done
we'll put it out there. Anything. Yeah. So what the hell, and why is it so hard? And I think we were so naive, me and my wife, we just felt like it didn't make sense why there's not healthy products on the market. And when I'm talking healthy, I'm not talking about headline health. I'm talking about truly, you eat it and you feel good after you eat it. We're talking no bloating, no acid indigestion. You're not farting all day. Just like, you just feel good after you eat it. Very difficult to find those snacks, because there's a trade-off in every snack I find, of where it just goes into your system, digests, and you move on with your day. Which is what's built such a loyal repeat following. Is it's less even about, Midday Squares tastes good. It's no, I actually just feel incredible after I eat the product, which keeps me coming back for more. Because when you go from a Midday Squares back to a sugar product or a sugar alcohol product, it's a mind. Like, you're like, whoa, I really feel the difference on the two. So we were naive on like that should be a simple journey, and it's absolutely not, because the entire infrastructure and supply chain is made to sell consumers shit, not because it's a big evil business. I think this is the big misconception, is that there is a term called supply and demand. And right now, we are in our own worst enemy's backyard in terms of ourselves. We have gotten used to the price tag of cheap.
Yep.
And to make the cycle to get expensive to be cheap, you have to ride through a thing called Valley of Death. And the Valley of Death is, I must be committed to buying expensive items to drive demand high enough so that manufacturing costs crash. And that expensive thing becomes the norm of the garbage. So the garbage is only cheap, not because there's this big, deep state behind it, although we won't get into the politics of it. There definitely is components, but it's because of over time, we've just become a consumer of these items, and it's very hard to unwind it. Why? A consumer thinks that they have the courage until they end up at the shelf. And then when they're at the shelf and they see the difference of $4.99 and $2.99, they crack and they vote with the dollar, which doesn't allow the supply chain cycle to cycle. And so that was something we were so naive about, to the point where we thought that we were going to be able to find another manufacturer to make this product. So the whole premise of Midday Squares is really simple. Just for everyone that's understanding, so we can unpack the hardness, is a new age chocolate bar. If you bought a chocolate bar in 2020, what should it be? It should make you feel great. It should have fiber, proteins. It should be delicious. It should not be a sugar crash, sugar spiking, glucose level destroyer. It shouldn't be anything. You should just be able to fucking enjoy it and feel good about it. That's our take on what chocolate bars should be. They shouldn't be sugar bombs. And that's what we created and brought to market. And in order to do that, we had to avoid a lot of lanes, i.e., no preservation in the products that we use. We didn't want to rely on natural or artificial flavors, not because there's anything against them. It causes, I don't know if you eat stuff from like snacking, they all kind of taste the same in aftertaste or start. So like, let's say I take you to the bar aisle and I blindfolded you, you would probably only be able to taste like three to four flavor variants, even though you're trying like 28 different companies. And that's
it is an overpowering, it's an overpowering on your tongue. It overrides. Yeah.
Yeah, it's over there. And that's because supply chains are consolidated. Flavor houses are using the same stuff. And we believe that, not even from a health perspective, we always dreamt about building a 100-year brand like a Hershey's. And in order to do that, we can't be a derivative of their product. So we can't just be a healthy Reese's Pieces cup. Why? I don't give a shit what Reese's Pieces cup that you buy in the grocery market that's not from Reese, that's healthier. When you're eating it, you are thinking about Hershey's. Their marketing, they own that. Whether you are brand X, Y, or Z, and I won't even say their names, not to throw them under the bus, but they will never own the cup. Hershey's will own the cup forever from a marketing psychology. So for us, we need to pass two litmus tests. We need to be incredibly differentiated in mouth experience and what we brought to your palate. And you needed to be able to know that you were eating a Midday Square if you were blindfolded, which we believe that we've done. We really believe that if you were a Midday Squares consumer and you were blindfolded and given a bunch of items, when you hit Midday Squares, you would know it was a Midday Squares and you would be able to call it out. That's very important for us in our R&D. Now, because we were so specific on that, we couldn't find a manufacturer in the country to make Midday Squares. We went to 26 different manufacturers. And what you realize in the supply chain is nobody wants to innovate in the rails because they have no incentive to. They are making bars this way, or they are making chocolate bars this way, and they're doing it for 4 companies or 8 companies or 9 companies. Why would they change it?
And here you come along with your weird new packaging from your weird new product, and you want to do the minimum order quantity, and they're like, no thanks.
No, thank you. Correct. Exactly. And they give you what they have, and it looks like everything else. And that's where I think the story got really interesting for our audience, was like, we always, going back to I think to sum this story up really nice, so many people focus on content as their way of distribution, but you've heard this before, and this is not just from us. Really, if you are making a podcast where the content is so good, it doesn't matter how shitty your technology is or anything, it will resonate and go. And it's the same thing when building an audience. I find people focus too little on the content versus the distribution. So what do I mean by that? Midday Squares are not the best content tellers on TikTok or Instagram. Absolutely not. You can find 100 better than us. But we are probably the only people in the world right now that have had the courage to publicly say we're trying to build $100 million business, and we're going to be manufacturers, and we're going to take you on that ride with us, and we're going to go through everything through that. And so by definition, the content that we are putting out is interesting because it's really hard.
Yep.
And
it's
that's
unique.
it.
It's unique. It's just that's really interesting. Yeah.
It's not more thought out than that. Like, there's no master plan. And my advice to people is just go do hard shit and you'll find an audience, because there's very few people in the world doing hard shit.
I mean, I can't think of a better way to end the podcast than that, to be honest. I think what's interesting is maybe this podcast could have started with, and kind of did start with, the idea of what could potentially be the things that hold you back from putting yourself out there. You know, we say building on public, but truly it's putting yourself out there. And the reality is, it's like, it can be hard. And you know what? So is working out. So is eating healthier. And so is
life,
maintaining great friendships. So is life.
Life
and
is
so
hard.
add this to the list of things that is hard but worth doing. I'm glad I did it today. I've been plugging away for 3 years on this podcast, and this is one of my favorite ones yet. And you were a stranger a couple weeks ago. We had seen each other in cyberspace, and now you're gifting me chocolate bars to my home, and I'm nibbling on them every day. And I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you sent them to me. And I kind of bought them, and I have bought them. But here we go.
But we're homies.
And then maybe one day we'll be at dinner, and people will be interrupting it, and they're like, "We know these guys."
Yeah, no, but like, that's how, man. The difference between us and everybody else is nothing. That's the takeaway from this call, is like, you are your own limiter in life. Just know that. Every bullshit excuse is a crutch, and you can't convince me otherwise. And I respect how hard life is, and I respect how scary it is. But you can get whatever you want in the world.
I'm not even going to try to say anything after that. Nick, thank you so much, man. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
You know, it's interesting because I think, and maybe I should have talked about it earlier, but truly the vulnerability to share, like, no one really shares the insecurities.
The skeletons.
Right?
The skeletons.
The insecurities. Yeah, the insecurities. Yeah. The insecurities just they'll never stop, and you reach new ones. You know, like, I think about my own business.
Let's do one live right now for your podcast. Live right now.
Okay.
First time hearing it, vulnerability. One, I love putting out everything because I don't have to live 2 lives and pretending like everything's hunky-dory. Everybody knows. Okay. So everybody listening to this, go Google cocoa prices after, and Midday Squares gross margin has effectively been wiped out in the last 200 days. We are hemorrhaging and face the possibility of bankruptcy. And that is not in my control. What's in our control is what we're going to do to try to survive it. And That's just the truth. And there you go. It's out into the world. I don't have to hold it in anymore. I don't have to go to sleep with anxiety at night. It's just, everybody knows, you know, and that's the way I think about it.
Wow. I appreciate you sharing that. I think, and because whenever you're in the journey of these things, it's like, the bigger you grow, the more people rely on you and what you do. And like, I live with that, you know, as we've gone from, at one point it was just me and it felt scary. And then it was like 2 or 3 people and that felt scary. And then it becomes 100 people and you're like, oh my gosh, like, there's all these people that what I say and do, or things that I can't control, to your point, has impacts. And it's like, you try so hard. You talked about how hard you try. And at the end of the day, you can't control cocoa prices, and you can control everything else. You do everything else perfectly. And it is just a reality. But I have faith, and I think you do too, that if you look at it in the long game, you know, the best days of Midday Squares are unequivocally ahead of it.
I believe that too.
It's just like, how do you survive in order to thrive? Well, I appreciate you sharing that, man, and especially taking the time right now of all times to be out here sharing that. I have no doubt that someone will take inspiration from this. That's what we have for you today on Marketing People Love. My name is Jacques Spitzer. And if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episode. The guests that we have on here tend to be people that I am personally inspired by, and Nick was no exception. I hope you all got some inspiration on putting yourself out there and everything positive that can happen because of it. Thanks again for listening to Marketing People Love.